A German shepherd was trapped on thin ice, whimpering as freezing water slowly consumed him. What seemed like a desperate and hopeless rescue mission soon turned into something no one could have predicted. What happened next left witnesses speechless and changed a small town forever. This is the heart-pounding true story of selfless bravery, an unbreakable bond, and a series of events that will make you question the limits of human compassion. This is the extraordinary tale of Storm, a German shepherd rescued from a frozen lake, and the officers who refused to let him die. Maple Creek, a small Midwestern town, was in the grip of its coldest winter in decades. For 15 straight days, a brutal polar vortex had dragged temperatures down to 20-degree warm, turning the once serene Lake Henderson into a treacherous sheet of unstable ice. Officer James Mitchell, a 34-year-old K-9 handler with the local police department, was just ending his patrol shift when a distress call came in. His longtime partner, Officer Diane Rodriguez, responded to the radio. "All units near Lake Henderson, we have a report of a dog stranded on the ice. Civilian attempted rescue. Situation critical." James immediately activated the sirens. He and Diane had worked together for 6 years and shared a deep love for animals. James's own K-9 partner, a Belgian Malinois named Rex, was safely at home due to the extreme cold. When they arrived at the lake, a small crowd had gathered. Through the swirling snow, James quickly assessed the situation. Roughly 100 yards from shore, a large German shepherd was stranded on a cracked patch of ice, its hind legs already submerged in the frigid water. The ice surrounding it was fractured like a spider web, threatening collapse with every passing second. The ice broke under him. A distressed woman explained, her breath fogging in the cold air. "He chased some geese too far out. My husband tried to follow, but the ice started cracking beneath him too." James examined the scene, noting the dog's failing strength and the visible onset of hypothermia. There was no time to wait for a specialized rescue team. "I'm going out there," he told Diane, already removing his heavy utility belt. "Call for backup and grab the thermal blankets." "James, that ice won't hold," Diane warned even as she reached for the radio. "At least wait for the ice rescue team." "That dog doesn't have hours, Diane. He's got minutes," James replied, voice low and resolute. He stripped down to his uniform pants and thermal undershirt, tied one end of a rope around his waist, and handed the other end to Diane. "If I go through, pull me back," he instructed. The crowd stood in tense silence as James stepped onto the brittle ice, spreading his weight evenly and crawling slowly toward the stranded animal. At around 20 yards, a sharp crack echoed beneath him. He froze, lungs burning from the freezing air, waiting for the ice to settle. Despite its fading strength, the German shepherd seemed to sense that help was near. It had stopped struggling and locked eyes with James, eyes filled not just with fear, but something deeper. "Trust." "Almost there, buddy," James called out, his voice steady across the frozen expanse. "Just hang on." Then disaster struck. Just 10 feet away from safety, the ice beneath the dog gave way completely. With a terrified yelp, the shepherd plunged into the lake, its head barely remaining above water. Without a second thought, James surged forward, the ice shattering under him as he dove in. The shock of the icy water was immediate and brutal, numbing his limbs and tightening his chest. He reached for the dog, gripping its thick fur with fingers quickly losing sensation. "I've got you," he gasped, fighting to keep them both above the surface. The ice around them continued to break apart. James's strength was fading, consciousness slipping. But when he looked into the dog's eyes, he saw something that jolted him awake. Not just desperation, but recognition. A deep, wordless connection. "We're getting out of this," James whispered through chattering teeth. "Both of us." Back on shore, Officer Diane Rodriguez watched with a pounding heart. She had seen James take risks before, but never like this. But watching James disappear beneath the ice sent a jolt of terror through Diane's body. The rope in her hand suddenly went slack. For one heart-stopping moment, she feared the worst. Then, with a violent tug, it snapped taut again. "I need help here," she shouted as newly arrived officers ran toward her. 3 officers immediately joined in, grabbing the rope and adding their strength. Officer Kevin Walsh, a seasoned veteran of the force, took charge. "Steady, together, pull." Slowly, the rope began to inch back, slicing a jagged path through the broken ice. On the shore, paramedics stood ready with thermal equipment. A crowd had gathered, watching in breathless silence as the winter sun dipped lower, casting long, cold shadows over the frozen lake. After what felt like an eternity, a dark figure emerged through the ice channel. James. Miraculously, he had maintained his grip on both the rope and the German Shepherd. His face was a frightening shade of blue, but his arms were locked tightly around the dog's chest in an unyielding embrace. As they reached shallower water, officers waded in, undeterred by the freezing cold. They grabbed James under the arms, dragging both him and the dog to safety. Paramedics moved swiftly, wrapping them in reflective thermal blankets and working with practiced urgency to counter the deadly hypothermia. "Pulse is weak, core temperature dangerously low," one paramedic reported while attaching monitors to James. "We need to transport, now." Beside him, another paramedic worked with a local veterinarian who had rushed to the scene. "Same here," the vet said grimly, examining the German Shepherd. "Critical condition." Diane knelt beside her partner as he was lifted onto a stretcher. "You crazy hero," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Hang in there." James's eyes fluttered open briefly, scanning for the dog. "Save him," he murmured through blue lips before slipping into unconsciousness. At Maple Creek Memorial Hospital, Dr. Eleanor Matthews was already waiting in the ER, having been briefed on the incoming patient. "Get him out of those wet clothes and start warming protocol immediately," she ordered. "I want core temp monitoring, warm saline IVs, and thermal blankets." Across town at the Lakeside Veterinary Emergency Center, the German Shepherd received similar care. Dr. Marcus Chen, the veterinary surgeon on duty, worked rapidly to stabilize the dog, assessing him for trauma while monitoring his temperature. "No collar, no microchip," Dr. Chen told his team. "Male, about 3 years old, no signs of abuse or neglect." Throughout the night, officers from the Maple Creek Police Department stood vigil in both waiting rooms. Chief Warren Collins moved between the hospital and the veterinary center, checking on both patients. By midnight, James had stabilized. Though doctors kept him sedated to help his body recover, his vital signs had improved. Remarkably, the German Shepherd also showed signs of resilience. By 2 a.m., his temperature was near normal and he was responsive. "Incredible recovery speed," Dr. Chen said, shaking his head. "Animals can be amazing survivors, but this one's fighting like hell." As dawn broke over Maple Creek, James finally regained full consciousness. His voice was hoarse and barely audible, but his first question caught the attending nurse off guard. "The dog?" he rasped. "Did he make it?" When told the shepherd had survived and was recovering well, tears filled James's eyes. He couldn't explain the overwhelming sense of relief or why he felt such a deep connection to this particular animal. Meanwhile, at the veterinary center, the dog's behavior raised questions of its own. Though still weak, he grew increasingly restless throughout the morning. Dr. Chen noticed his ears constantly twitching toward the window, as if listening for something or someone. No one yet realized that the rescue was only the beginning. This event would spark something truly extraordinary. An unspoken connection that defied explanation and would soon challenge everything people thought they knew about the bond between humans and animals. 3 days after the rescue, James was discharged from the hospital with strict orders to rest. James's hypothermia had been severe, dangerously close to causing permanent damage. But since regaining consciousness, something else had been bothering him. Strange sensations and vivid dreams. Not just dreams, but fragments of experience that felt eerily real yet weren't his own. He saw flashes of snow-covered ground, heard the sharp crack of ice beneath paws, and felt the panic of freezing water engulfing him. "Maybe you should talk to someone," Diane suggested gently as she drove him home. "Trauma can mess with your head." James nodded absently, but his attention was focused elsewhere. As they passed the Lakeside Veterinary Center, he spoke up. "Has anyone claimed the German Shepherd yet?" "No," Diane replied. "The department posted notices, but no one's come forward. Dr. Chen says he's recovered enough to be released to a shelter, but he's been acting oddly. He won't eat much and he keeps looking at the door." A sudden, overwhelming urge gripped James. "Can we stop, just for a minute?" At the veterinary center, Dr. Chen greeted them with visible surprise. "Officer Mitchell, I didn't expect to see you up and about so soon. How are you feeling?" "Better," James replied automatically, though the strange sensations had only intensified the moment he stepped inside. "I wanted to check on the dog." Dr. Chen's expression turned serious. "Maybe you can help us make sense of his behavior. He was recovering well physically, but since yesterday, he's refused food and become increasingly agitated. We've ruled out any medical cause." As they approached the kennels, a heavy silence fell. The German Shepherd, who had reportedly been pacing restlessly, suddenly went completely still. His ears perked forward, nose working the air. Then, before anyone could react, he let out a high-pitched whine, desperate and raw. His entire body trembled. "That's strange," Dr. Chen murmured. "He hasn't made a sound since—" He stopped mid-sentence. James had just stepped into view. The change was immediate. The whine turned to excited barking. The German Shepherd's tail wagged furiously. He pressed his body against the gate, as if trying to force his way through to get to James. "He recognizes you," Diane said in amazement. But it was more than recognition. James felt it too, a pull so strong it defied logic. The strange sensations surged, no longer vague but sharp and unmistakable. Impressions, emotions, instincts. Not memories exactly, but something just as powerful. "Can I—" James hesitated. "Can I see him up close?" Dr. Chen, clearly intrigued, nodded. "We'll bring him into the meeting room. He's been gentle with the staff even when distressed." A few moments later, the veterinary technician struggled to hold the dog. Back as they entered the room, the moment he saw James, the shepherd lunged, not with aggression, but with desperate urgency. James dropped to his knees, and the dog was on him instantly. He didn't jump or bark. He simply pressed himself against James's chest, head tucked beneath his chin, his body trembling with what could only be described as relief. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Chen whispered. "It's as if he knows you intimately." James cradled the dog's head in his hands, overwhelmed. The moment their bodies touched, the strange impressions multiplied. It was as though he could feel the dog's emotions, raw, pure and wordless. And somehow, James knew the dog could feel his too. "I think I'm experiencing what he feels," James said quietly, the words sounding impossible even to him. "And I think he's experiencing mine." Diane and Dr. Chen exchanged concerned glances, uncertain whether this was the after-effect of James's ordeal or something far stranger. But the German Shepherd's behavior left no room for doubt. He refused to be separated from James, staying pressed against him, refusing even to sit unless he could maintain contact. As James ran a hand through the dog's thick fur, a name formed. In his mind, not one he made up or remembered, but one he somehow knew with absolute certainty. "Storm," he said softly. "His name is Storm." Storm's reaction was immediate. His ears perked up and his tail wagged with renewed energy. It was his name, without question. But how James had known it remained a mystery even to him. Bringing Storm home was both a natural decision and a complicated one. James lived alone in a modest house with a fenced yard, already equipped for Rex, the department's K9, whom he occasionally cared for. But explaining the depth of his connection with Storm proved more difficult. "You nearly died saving him," Chief Collins had said when James requested to adopt Storm if no owner came forward. No one would question a bond forming. "But some of what you're describing, I know how it sounds," James admitted, "but I can't explain it any other way. When I'm with him, I sense things I shouldn't be able to. It's like we share something deeper." After a mandatory 2-week waiting period with no one stepping forward to claim him, Storm officially became James's dog. That first night in his new home, Storm refused to sleep in the plush dog bed James had prepared. Instead, he settled beside James's bed, never taking his eyes off him. Sometime after midnight, James jolted awake, heart pounding, every nerve on edge. He hadn't heard anything, no noise, no disturbance. But Storm was already up, standing stiffly by the bedroom door, a low growl rumbling in his throat. James quietly reached for his service weapon from the bedside safe and moved silently toward the hallway. As he approached the door, a strange awareness settled over him, subtle impressions not entirely his own, a foreign presence in the living room, the scent of unfamiliar cologne, the faint swish of fabric brushing against furniture. "Police." "Officer," he called out sharply, "I know you're in my living room. Come out slowly, hands visible." Silence. Then, a sudden rush of movement toward the back door. James flipped the hallway light and gave chase, Storm sprinting ahead. They caught the intruder, a known burglar who'd been targeting homes in the area, trying to climb over the backyard fence. Later, during questioning, the man asked, bewildered, "How did you know exactly where I was?" "I didn't make a sound. The house was dark." James didn't answer. How could he explain the truth? That he hadn't heard or seen the man, but somehow sensed him through Storm. That their awareness had merged, forming a perception neither of them could have achieved alone. And that was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, their bond deepened. Storm and James moved together with uncanny precision, their routines blending with seamless rhythm. Storm responded to James's needs before they were spoken. James, in turn, would reach for the leash just seconds before Storm needed to go. Outside, as if anticipating it, Diane noticed it during her visits. "It's like watching a dance you've rehearsed for years," she said, eyes wide. "But you've only had him a month." James had given up trying to explain it. Instead, he began documenting the occurrences, keeping a journal of the unexplainable, waking from deep sleep the moment Storm needed to go out, despite no sound. Answering the door seconds before anyone knocked. Refilling the water bowl right before Storm showed signs of thirst. Avoiding threats blocks before they were visible. Most extraordinary were the dreamlike flashes James started experiencing. Moments that didn't belong to him. Running through thick forests, curling up under abandoned structures. Faces of strangers, people who had briefly crossed paths with the dog. Through these vivid impressions, James began to understand pieces of Storm's past. He had been abandoned as a puppy and had survived on his own for nearly 3 years. Dr. Chen continued to monitor Storm closely, fascinated by the dog's remarkable behavior and resilience. But even he struggled to find explanations that fit within the bounds of traditional science. Storm's physical recovery had been impressive, but it was the bond between him and James that increasingly fascinated Dr. Chen. There are documented cases of humans and animals forming extraordinary connections, he told James during a follow-up visit. service dogs who can detect seizures before they happen, therapy animals that respond to emotional distress with no visible cue. But what you're describing goes beyond anything in the literature. The connection with Storm had become central to James's life. It enhanced his awareness in subtle but powerful ways, heightened instincts, sharper reflexes, a sixth sense that extended beyond his own body. His recent performance evaluations noted significant improvements, increased situational awareness, faster response times, and intuitive decision-making. All of it pointed to something more than coincidence. But neither James nor Storm realized that their bond was about to be tested, pushed to reveal its deeper purpose. 2 months after the ice rescue, James returned to full active duty. Though Storm was not an official K9, he accompanied James on select calls, always well-behaved and uncannily attuned. Chief Collins chose not to enforce protocol too strictly, sensing something extraordinary was at work. The Maple Creek Spring Festival should have been a routine assignment: crowd control, visibility, and community engagement. James and Diane were assigned to patrol the eastern section of the park, where vendor booths and children's activities were clustered. "Beautiful day for it," Diane remarked as they walked past laughing families and colorful tents. Storm trotted at James's side, occasionally accepting gentle pats from children. "Perfect," James replied, though deep down he felt a faint, persistent unease he couldn't explain. By noon, the festival was in full swing. Music played, vendors sold food and crafts, and the mood was cheerful. But James noticed Storm's behavior start to shift. His ears twitched more frequently. His head turned sharply at subtle sounds. He was tracking something. James's internal tension mirrored Storm's growing agitation, a pressure building behind his eyes, subtle but insistent. "Something's wrong," he muttered to Diane. She glanced at him, eyebrows raised. "What do you mean?" Before he could answer, dispatch came over the radio. "All units, be advised. Silent alarm triggered at Maple Creek Community Bank. Possible robbery in progress. Units en route." Diane and James exchanged glances. The bank was only 2 blocks from the festival. A robbery during the town's largest annual event? The timing couldn't be a coincidence. "We should stay here," Diane said. "Let the other units handle it. Our job's the festival." James nodded, but Storm had other ideas. Suddenly, the German Shepherd became visibly agitated, pulling toward the northeastern edge of the park. His hackles rose, his body taut with purpose. And then came the impressions. James felt them like flashes, disjointed and sensory, a figure shifting in the shadows, the dull gleam of metal, the acrid tang of fear and sweat. The pressure in his skull intensified. "We need to check the maintenance building," James said, already moving, Storm straining at the leash to lead the way. "Mitchell, what's going on?" Diane followed, hand drifting to her weapon. "Talk to me." "I don't know yet," James said. "Just trust me." The maintenance building was a small, nondescript structure at the park's edge, typically locked during public events. As they approached, James's borrowed senses sharpened, vision, sound, even smell merging with Storm's heightened perception. Storm let out a low growl, his body rigid. They were not alone. James's instincts screamed confirmation. Someone was inside who shouldn't be. He and Diane positioned themselves on either side of the maintenance building door. James gave her a quick nod, then called out, loud and clear, "Police! Anyone inside? Come out with your hands visible." Silence. Then a muffled whimper, a child's cry, quickly stifled. James didn't hesitate. He kicked in the door. Inside, 3 masked men froze, caught mid-movement. Between them stood a terrified 6-year-old girl, her face streaked with tears. One of the men had a gun pressed to her temple. "Back off, cop," he growled, "or she's dead." Time slowed. Through the link with Storm, James perceived everything at once. the gunman's trembling finger tightening on the trigger, the second man's hand drifting toward a concealed weapon, the third shifting to rush the door. Each threat registered with crystalline clarity, and in that critical moment, their shared awareness became their greatest weapon. Without a word, Storm launched into action. He moved like a bullet, precise, focused, sinking his teeth into the arm holding the gun. At the same instant, James fired a single shot, striking the second gunman in the shoulder, neutralizing the weapon before it was drawn. Diane, reacting to James's subtle shift, tackled the third man as he lunged toward the exit. In under 5 seconds it was over. The girl was unharmed. All 3 suspects were on the ground. Later, interrogation revealed the full plan. The bank robbery had been a diversion. The true goal was a ransom kidnapping. The child was the daughter of Maple Creek's wealthiest resident. No one had even noticed her disappearance in the chaos of the festival. "How did you know?" Chief Collins asked James afterward. The maintenance building wasn't even on the event's security checklist. James looked down at Storm, who sat calmly beside him, ever alert. "Instinct," he said simply, but both man and dog knew it was more than that. Their bond, born in the frozen waters of a winter rescue, had evolved into something else, something beyond instinct, a bridge between human and canine perception. A fusion neither fully understood, yet trusted completely. They had saved a child's life. The media hailed James as a hero. Exceptional police work, they called it. The local paper's headline read, "Local officer and his dog save child from kidnappers." Storm's role was mentioned only briefly, an afterthought in the story. That suited James just fine. Only Diane, who had seen the unspoken synchronicity between them, suspected the truth ran deeper. As James and Storm drove home that evening, exhausted, but content, James reflected on the strange, miraculous path that had led to this moment. What began as a rescue had become a transformation, a partnership not just of loyalty, but of mind and spirit. "What are we becoming, Storm?" James asked softly as the town lights faded behind them. Storm rested his head on James's shoulder, his consciousness brushing gently against James's mind in return. The answer wasn't in words, but in the shared certainty that passed between them. Together, they were becoming something extraordinary. 3 days later, Chief Collins called James into his office. "The FBI wants to speak with you," he said, getting straight to the point. "They want to know how you knew the suspects were in that building." James tensed. "What did you tell them?" Collins leaned back in his chair, a faint smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. "I told them my officers have exceptional intuition," Collins replied, studying James carefully. "Look, Mitchell, I've been in law enforcement for 30 years. I've seen things I can't explain. Whatever's happening between you and that dog, I don't need to understand it to know it's valuable." He slid a folder across the desk. "The department's creating a special K9 unit. I want you to head it. Storm will be officially certified, with all appropriate training, of course." James opened the folder. Inside were enrollment forms for an accelerated K9 handler program. "Sir, Storm isn't a trained police dog." "No," Collins said. "He's not. He's special. But this makes it official. No more bending regulations. You'll have full authority to keep him with you on duty always." It was a perfect solution, formalizing Storm's presence while giving them cover for abilities that had no textbook explanation. James accepted on the spot. At the K9 training center, Storm's natural aptitude stunned the instructors. Where other dogs took weeks to learn basic commands, Storm performed them on the first try, often anticipating them before James even spoke. "It's like he's reading your mind," one trainer joked, not knowing how close to the truth he was. Over the 6-week program, James and Storm's bond deepened further. Their shared perceptions, once chaotic, became more focused, refined. James could now access Storm's enhanced senses intentionally. Storm, in turn, seemed to grasp abstract human concepts, danger, intention, even strategy, in ways that defied logic. One evening, while walking the training grounds, a woman approached, Sergeant Rebecca Torres, a seasoned K-9 instructor with 20 years of experience. "Mitchell, can I ask you something?" Unofficially, James stiffened, instinctively ready to deflect. But what she said next surprised him. "I've seen this before. Once. A handler and his dog in Afghanistan. They developed something beyond normal. They could predict ambushes, detect IEDs, even scanners missed. The military studied them, called it synchronous awareness." "What happened to them?" James asked cautiously. Torres's expression darkened. "The dog took a bullet meant for his handler, survived but was retired. Once they were separated, the connection faded." She paused, watching Storm with knowing eyes. "No one ever figured out why it happened, but I recognized it in you two right away." James hesitated, then decided to trust her. "Does anyone else know?" "No, and they won't hear it from me." She handed him a business card. "Dr. Eliza Hammond, Northwestern University. She studies advanced human-animal cognition. If you ever want answers, she's the only one I'd trust." James pocketed the card, a wave of relief washing over him. Maybe they weren't entirely alone. Maybe there was a reason this had happened to someone else, too. When James and Storm returned to Maple Creek, it was as an official K-9 unit. Storm now wore a custom police vest and badge. Their constant companionship, once an oddity, now raised no eyebrows. They quickly earned a reputation for extraordinary effectiveness, especially in search and rescue. 3 months after the Spring Festival incident, their bond would face its greatest test yet. A fire broke out in a low-income apartment complex housing mostly elderly residents. By the time James and Storm arrived, flames had consumed most of the upper floors. Firefighters were retreating. The building was collapsing. "We've cleared every accessible unit," the fire chief told them grimly. "It's too dangerous. Now, no one else is getting in there." But Storm growled low, pulling with desperate urgency toward the building. James felt it too, a presence. Faint, fearful, mist. He turned to the chief. "There's still someone in there," he said, voice steady. "I can feel it." He insisted to the chief. "Northeast corner, upper floor. That section's about to collapse." The fire chief protested. "We already checked those units. Twice." James looked down at Storm. The intensity in the dog's posture mirrored the certainty building within James, an unshakable conviction that defied logic. "We're going in." It was a decision that violated every protocol. But James's reputation and Storm's unwavering insistence persuaded the chief to allow one final rapid sweep. Equipped with oxygen masks, including a specialized unit for Storm, they entered the inferno. The heat was blistering, smoke reduced visibility to near zero. But James wasn't relying solely on sight. He moved guided by Storm's keener senses, and by the strange expanding perception that connected them both. In the apartment at the northeast corner, they found him, an elderly man unconscious in a bathtub, wrapped in wet towels. A last-ditch effort to survive. The water had masked his heat signature from thermal imagers. He would have been missed, left behind. Together, James and Storm pulled him out. Emerging from the smoke like specters, the man cradled between them. Moments later, the floor gave way. Later, at the hospital, the fire chief shook his head. "We cleared that apartment twice. How did you know?" James glanced at Storm, who sat alert at his side. "We just knew." That night, exhausted and smoke-stained, James finally reached into his jacket and pulled out the card Sergeant Torres had given him. Maybe it was time to find out what they were becoming. not just for themselves, but for everyone whose life might one day depend on their extraordinary bond. 6 months after pulling Storm from a frozen lake, James sat in the research center of Dr. Eliza Hammond at Northwestern University. The cognitive neuroscientist had come to Maple Creek after their first phone call, eager to study what she called one of the most significant cases of interspecies neural connection ever recorded. She displayed EEG results on her tablet, 2 overlapping patterns dancing across the screen. "These are your brain waves," she explained, "and these, storms. When you're in physical contact, they synchronize perfectly. It's as if you're sharing a portion of your consciousness." Storm explored the lab calmly, his movements deliberate, unbothered by the unfamiliar environment. "Can you explain why this happened?" James asked. Dr. Hammond adjusted her glasses. "I have a theory. Near-death experiences sometimes trigger neurological changes we barely understand. You were both in physical contact during an episode of extreme trauma, oxygen deprivation, hypothermia, survival at the edge of death. That may have created a unique neural bridge." She swiped to another screen. "But why you two specifically? That's the mystery. Some individuals may have a genetic predisposition. We've documented similar cases, always dismissed as coincidence or superstition. Human and animal survivors forming bonds that border on telepathic. It's rare, but real. Is it permanent?" Dr. Hammond hesitated. "Unknown. The connection might strengthen or fade, but what you've achieved, what you've done together, is remarkable." James nodded. He thought of the child in the maintenance shed, the old man in the bathtub, the dozens of people whose lives had been changed because of this bond. "I'd like to continue studying you both," she offered. "Not in a lab. I understand your work is too important, but with remote monitoring, the implications for search and rescue alone are enormous." James considered it. Hammond had proven herself, curious but respectful, interested in understanding, not exploiting. Storm approached, resting his head on James's knee. A wave of warmth and reassurance flowed between them. "We'll help however we can," James said, "but our work comes first." "Of course," she agreed. "Speaking of which, Chief Collins said you're developing a new training protocol." James smiled. The Mitchell-Storm protocol was his brainchild, a training system designed to strengthen the natural empathetic bond between handlers and their canine partners. "We can't replicate what Storm and I have. Not exactly. But we can teach others to listen better, feel more, trust their intuition and their dogs." When they returned to Maple Creek, a new case awaited. A series of unexplained disappearances along wilderness trails near town. 3 hikers in 2 months, no evidence, no witnesses. Chief Collins briefed them quietly. "The FBI's assembling a task force, but I want you two on this first." The next morning, James and Storm stood at the trailhead where the latest hiker had vanished. As they moved deeper into the forest, their senses extended outward, melding, scanning, feeling. Through Storm, James could perceive the history of scents, overlapping trails of human movement, animal migration, disturbed soil. Through James, Storm grasped the significance of broken branches, subtle patterns, the unnatural stillness in the air. 2 miles down the trail, they found the first clue, a single boot print, preserved in dried mud. Conventional searchers had passed it by, but to James and Storm it stood out like a beacon. Deeper into the wilderness, they uncovered a hidden campsite, expertly camouflaged from casual detection. By sunset, they had mapped the movements of someone who wasn't lost, but hunting. Someone stalking humans through the woods with chilling precision. The next day, with tactical support, they tracked and apprehended the culprit. A survivalist who had been living off the grid for years, gradually descending into murderous paranoia. The case made national headlines, but James deflected the attention. "Just good police work," he told the press. Only Chief Collins and Dr. Hammond knew the truth, that this case, like so many others, had been solved not with conventional methods, but through an extraordinary connection between man and dog. James and Storm had become something new, not entirely human, not entirely canine, but a synthesis of both, something greater. 1 year to the day after the frozen lake rescue, James and Storm returned to that very spot. The ice was gone now. Spring had warmed the waters that had nearly claimed them both. Standing at the edge of the lake, James reflected on how that desperate moment, trying to save a dying dog, had reshaped his entire life. What had begun as an act of compassion had grown into something science couldn't explain. A partnership forged in cold, sharpened by fire, and proven in the darkest corners of human experience. Storm pressed gently against his leg. Their consciousnesses flowed together with ease. No words were needed, only that shared pulse of knowing, an unspoken dialogue deeper than language. They had been forged in ice and reborn. "Ready to go home, partner?" James asked. The question was a formality. The answer was already there, in the warmth that flickered across their bond, in the steady beat of two hearts, perfectly in sync. Together they turned from the lake and walked toward whatever awaited. No longer merely officer and canine, they were something else now, a bridge between species, a living testament to the extraordinary bonds that can form when trust, love, and purpose intertwine. If this story touched your heart, remember, the connection we share with animals can transcend what science understands. Like, share, subscribe, and never underestimate the power of an extraordinary bond between human and companion.